So New Year's resolutions um, are a big thing. We make promises to be better people. We say, okay, this year I'm going to change this habit, or this year I'm going to add this discipline. So I'm curious, let's use the chat feature. What are some of the New Year's resolutions you've either tried yourself or you've heard others try? So we'll leave it generic so you don't get pinned for whatever the New Year's resolution is. But what are some of the New Year's resolutions you've heard attempted throughout the years or attempted yourself? Go ahead and use the chat bar and type in some things. Weight loss is definitely a big one. Yeah. Cut sugar. Okay. Stay productive. No procrastinating. That would be a difficult one for me. Exercise, be healthier, self-care, healthy eating, worry less, try not to stress out so much, get in shape. These are all pretty regular. Of course, eat better and exercise. Yeah. Okay, read the Bible in 1 year. It's great, Yolanda. Life balance, being better, not bitter, worrying too much. Okay. These are all good. These are the sorts of things that you often hear when it comes to New Year's resolutions, right? I want to lose weight. Or maybe there's a habit that's not healthy. And so we want to maybe drink less alcohol, or there's a coping mechanism where you get distracted by screens. And so we want to do less of that. Maybe we want to find ways to be more committed to our church and faith community. Maybe we want to pray more, read our Bible more regularly, be a better parent or spouse, sort of give attention to the relationships that we have. And the thing about New Year's resolutions, and I don't think this is a stab in the dark, I don't think this is inaccurate, is that they just tend not to last, right? The habits and practices that we try to overcome, or the habits and practices that we try to engage, the how we are, it didn't get there overnight. And the stamina to overcome things that have been deeply embedded in us, rhythms, habits, practices, postures, trying to overcome that is really difficult. And it's hard to maintain our New Year's resolutions. Right? Perhaps eating healthier becomes too exhausting, and we fail one night to eat healthy. And so we throw it all out the window in one night and go back to our old habits. Maybe a hard situation at work or at home, it pushes us back into coping mechanisms. So we go back to our habits. We watch screens to tune out, or we decide maybe a couple drinks couldn't hurt that much. Or maybe it just becomes too hard because you don't have the support of others around you. You've made a commitment to be a better you, but the people in your life don't feel the need to hold the same commitments. And so you're all alone, and whatever the commitment might be, without others to join you. And it's just easier to give up, to not do it alone. And then we fast forward 9, 10, 11 months later, 1 year comes to an end and another year is beginning. And so we think, okay, this year, this is the year I'm going to make it happen. And then we do it year after year, rinse and repeat. And this year might feel a little bit different. I mean, our world has been so radically disrupted in the last year that for some of us, like just surviving feels like a reasonable New Year's resolution, getting to the next day. So much has been taken from us. So much has been disrupted and has created a level of uncertainty that trying to do something special just isn't in the cards for us. And so we're going to go ahead and just keep surviving. But I want to talk about one potential New Year's resolution, a new practice that is actually been around forever. It's an ancient practice, and it's a life-changing practice that has implications for our lives, for our work, for our faith. And the New Year resolution that I want to propose, excuse me, the New Year's resolution I want to propose is the ancient practice of hospitality. And first, I want to frame what I mean by the word hospitality, because we hear it and oftentimes we think of the hospitality industry. We think of hotels. And the problem with this is that we often conflate being a good host or hostess with being hospitable. So we had good friends for a season, and Tabitha was one who had really been gifted as a good host. She constantly was having people over to her house for meals. When you went over to their house, your plate was always full. Your cup was always full of drink. You always had enough. And she would talk about this as a gift, as a gift of hospitality. And in some way, in some measure, it's kind of true. But on the other hand, it was really hard to be honest, to feel free to speak. Because the moment you said something that she or someone else disagreed with, conflict would arise. That you would always leave their home not hungry and definitely full, but you never really had opportunity to speak openly and honestly. She was a great host, um, but you couldn't be honest. I don't know if she was hospitable. Henry Nouwen defines hospitality as this: hospitality is creating space for others to be fully themselves. So, hospitality is that space where you seek wholeness on behalf of others. This is why food is often central to hospitality, because it's impossible to be whole as a whole person when you're hungry. But it isn't simply limited to hunger or the physical space around us or being comfortable. Hospitality is space where physical, emotional, and spiritual wholeness may be addressed. So, the first example of hospitality that we find in scripture is in Genesis 18 in the oaks of Mamre. Abraham is underneath the tree, and three strangers appear. Abraham gives them shade underneath the tree, and he runs into the tent and he fixes the finest meat, gives them the best drink. He is being a good host, he's being hospitable. But with time, we find out as the story unfolds that these three strangers are, in fact, the Lord, and they come with a message that Sarah will, in fact, have a child, even in her old age. And what's significant about this moment is that hospitality is not a one way street. Abraham extends hospitality to the strangers, the Lord, and the strangers, the Lord, extend the news that Sarah will have a child, that both are receiving, both are giving. In Luke 10, there's a story of Jesus sending out the 70 disciples to every town and place that he himself intended to go. And he sends them out in pairs and he tells them to rely on the hospitality of others, to stay in a home, eat and drink what they provide, he tells his disciples. And so you see, once again, the disciples who are bringing the news of the inbreaking kingdom of God, but they're also receiving the kindness of shelter and food. It's not a one way street. Hospitality is both given and received. Both of these texts are really, I think, perfect example of when hospitality is happening, it becomes hard to distinguish who is host and who is guest, because both receive, both give. I was a minister, a pastor for a church in Bellingham, Washington. And one day, a woman who was a coordinator at an apartment that housed primarily migrant workers. She helped with after school programs and helped create programs to sort of keep kids connected and not in trouble. She came over and she rang the doorbell of the church, and we just started chatting. And the church had this really large piece of property in the back. And their apartment complex overlooked, and so she could see it. And Lindsay and I just exchanged pleasantries. And then she said, "Hey, have you ever thought about a community garden back there?" She's like, my family's, most of them are very poor and could use sort of good, sustainable access to vegetables. And I was able to say, that's interesting you mentioned that, because just last night at our Wednesday night Bible study, we had a discussion about what to do with that land. And one of the things that we got most energized and excited about was the fact that we could possibly do a community garden. And so here we are, 24 hours from one another. The church had just talked about possibility of community garden. And then Lindsay comes over from the apartment complex and she goes, "Well, how about a community garden?" Fast forward another 24 hours, and Bill, who is my son's Boy Scout leader, he comes over and we're just chatting about Boy Scouts. And he asks, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing a community garden?" His house butted up against the property on the opposite side of the apartments. And in this moment, I'm wondering, okay, God, what are you up to? we gathered and the three of us sort of shared the dreams and possibilities. And it was this remarkable space of hospitality. And we named it the Paz Garden, which is Spanish for peace. And it was unique because no one was really the owner. Um, the church provided the land. Lindsay provided the community to engage in the garden, and Bill brought his expertise as a master gardener, that everyone was a host and everyone was a guest. It was one of the clearest experiences for me of what hospitable space looks like. What if we saw our work, our neighborhood, our homes as the very place to practice hospitality? And I'm not just talking about being a good host. Talk about what if we saw our colleagues, employees, clients, friends, loved ones, those with whom we interact as the very place in which and with whom we should practice hospitality? What if, along with the particular tasks of our work or responsibilities at home or the things we do in our community, what if we look to create space for people to be more fully themselves? What if we allowed others to give that which we might need to be more fully ourselves? How might we create space in which we both give and receive? So I want to give a few practical tips of what hospitality might look like for you in this new year. First one is this: talk less and listen more. Easier said than done. As a preacher of 18 years, it's easy for me to say, very hard for me to follow. But I think it matters, because being able to embrace listening is fundamentally an act of hospitality. What if we cared more about understanding others than being understood? What if we cared more about hearing what others have to share than getting what we want to share out so others can hear us? I have a mentor who talks about the gift of listening people into free speech. And he would invite church members and disciples of Jesus to practice this, to listen people into free speech. And what he meant by this was, you listen long enough that people are willing to more freely share of themselves, that you're a trusted person, that you're not just there to fix them or to change them, but you're there to receive who they are. And so they trust you to speak openly and to speak freely about who they are and what they care about. So the first practical tip for this new year is to talk less and listen more. The second one, and this is difficult during a pandemic. I want to admit that. But the second practical tip is practice receiving what others have to offer. I mean, for many Americans, and I think particularly Christian Americans, we love to give. But receiving that which others have to offer is often really hard. Maybe we don't want to feel like we're reliant on others. Perhaps it makes us feel weak. And we live in a culture that idolizes self-sufficiency and self-reliance in our ability to produce and manage, that we are what we do, right? But we weren't made, I think, to live in isolation, self-sufficiency. Human flourishing, that which God longs for the world, is not where everyone's siloed, alone, making do on their own. True human community that flourishes is everyone bringing that which they have to offer to the table and receiving that which others have to give. So maybe it's help with a project that you really don't want to ask for help on. Maybe it's in your coming weeks, in your classes, whether you're getting started or continue, it's asking for help or asking the question that you're nervous to ask because you don't want to look stupid or you don't want to look like you don't have it figured out. But it's actually extending some vulnerability so that others might be able to give what you need. Perhaps it's simply receiving a kind word that someone has to offer. Maybe you struggle with someone giving you a compliment and you always need to give one back. What if you just said thank you? Receive the gift without giving into the need that you have to give back in the moment. Maybe you're constantly the one who offers a listening ear, and someone is willing to be that for you so that you get to unload a little bit of what you might be carrying. And a really simple practice of hospitality is just learning how to receive what others have to give us. It's probably the hardest, but remember that hospitality is never a one-way street. It's that space where it's hard to tell who's host and who's guest. And then finally, I want to say this: pay attention. Abraham and Sarah had to be paying attention to receive the three strangers. The disciples, as they're sent out by Jesus to the towns and places, they had to pay attention to who they were going to and who shared in their peace. So we find some words from Hebrews. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. This is a part of the gift of being hospitable. And again, I want to remind us, it's not just about being the host, but about creating space for people to be fully themselves. That in creating that space, we actually might be encountering the divine. The most necessary capacity for this, I think, has nothing to do with being a good cook. It has nothing to do with keeping the glasses of our guests full. Or making sure the physical space is comfort. The most necessary capacity to extend hospitality is the capacity to pay attention, to look at the world around us with greater curiosity and presence, and identify those who might need something that we can give, but also identify those who have something to offer that we might be able to benefit from. This might actually be a little bit of a gift of a pandemic. Most of us have been forced to simplify. Most of us have been forced to slow down. And we often have been filling those cracks with different distractions or more noise or more busyness. But I wonder if in this new year, in this new world that we find ourselves in, that a gift we might give ourselves and a gift we might give our community is to actually open up the space to be more attentive. To be on the lookout for what God might be doing and to offer ourselves the best we have to others and to receive the best that others have to us. As we find ourselves in this time of year, making resolutions, maybe like me, you've just thrown them out this year. So even talking about New Year's resolutions isn't very helpful. I want us to be resolute. Resolute to be more attentive, to be more present, to be thoughtful about creating space, even if it's over Zoom, even if it's over a phone call, even it can be done in a car, to create space where others might feel the freedom to be more fully themselves, and to learn the mutuality of God's hospitality in the giving and receiving that takes place when we share in that space. It doesn't have to be hard. It can be done through really simple practices of listening, of receiving, and paying attention. Anyone can do these things. So no matter what your resolutions might be this year, I want to invite you into the resolution of attentiveness, the resolution that leads to hospitality, which is the sharing of space where all can be more fully whole.